When I was a sophomore in high school, we moved to Shippensburg. And that's when we started the first services up in the radio station there in Shippensburg at the time. And Mom and Dad rented part of the room in the radio station to start services. And it seated about 20 people. And they thought that was going to be pretty big. And that filled up pretty quickly. Then we moved down, and the people, and I can't remember their name, but they had the what is now the educational building was a plumbing and air conditioning and heating business, and they had some extra space in their warehouse. His wife was there at the church all the time. She talked her husband into having him allow them to have services in the warehouse. And so that was the second location, and that seated about 50 people. And it didn't take very long before that place was full. And that's when the idea of building a new building. And of course, her husband owned the land that the church is on now. And so he sold the land to him for a very low number. I don't remember what the number is, but at the time he said, I want this much, but give me half of it and I'll donate the other half. The building itself started in the summer of 1953. Mother was going to Africa for the first time, and she left us behind to start building the building. That was her first visit to Africa the day after we laid that cornerstone. And when she came back, the church was pretty much finished. Fortunately, we had quite a few people who were going to the church at that point who were in some type of building trade. One of them being my Uncle Louis. I was involved in all of it because when I got home from school, my dad would say, let's go, and we would go down. And most of the building occurred at nighttime because people were working in the daytime. And so they would set up lights, and it was primarily volunteer labor that built that building. And there were also times when you had to shovel the snow off before you could start again because it was in the wintertime. And snow would cover the place. Well, I was kind of the gopher for all of the tough jobs because I was young. And when you're young, you can do some things that you couldn't do when you're older. I mixed all of the mud for the outside of the building and carried it to the guys who were plastering it. That was one of the toughest jobs I had because it took a lot of mud. There's 3 coats of mud on the outside of the block. There was 2 coats of red and 1 coat of cream colored, which is what they cut out to make it look like bricks. So that was one of the ones I remember disliking the most because it was so heavy and such hard work. We didn't have mixers. We had troughs that we mixed the mud in with a hoe and then carried it over and climbed up the scaffolding to give it to the guys who were doing what I thought was the easy job of plastering. My second most difficult was the blocks. The church was built by the biggest blocks that I think were available ever. As I recall, they weighed about 64 pounds apiece. And I used to carry 2 of them up onto the scaffolding at a time, and they were all in the front of the church, and I had to carry them up onto the church and in up the scaffolding, and the block layers were busy laying them, and I was mixing the mud for it and carrying the blocks up. So I definitely had, I thought, the worst job in the building of the church. I recall when we had the dedication to the building, it was very exciting because people came from all over, and it was a very exciting time. Dr. Wyatt was the speaker. People came from as far away as Reading, Pennsylvania, and Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, because Dr. Wyatt was well known. And Mom and Dad had the radio program, and also one up in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The radio stations were also promoting the dedication. It was a motley crew. Nice people, but of all different kinds. There were Mennonites and of various different religious backgrounds that started coming. And interestingly, a lot of the people that came regularly came from 20 to 50 miles away. Like I remember a family by the name of Malots. They came from someplace halfway to Pittsburgh, out on the Maryland border, and they would be there every Sunday. There was another family from Dillsburg that had been going there for a very long time, the Stitzels. They were some of the early ones, yes. And so it was an exciting time. There was a lot of interesting things happening. And they all loved to come down there because on Saturday nights it was the hoppinest place in town. It's when my mother and dad were having healing services, and we would have the whole area parked full of cars, and the whole field was parked full of cars with people that were in crutches, and all kinds of things were happening. It was exciting. The church was pretty much full all the time, and Mom and Dad felt that they were called to go into the missions field in Cuba. And they had turned the church over to another pastor who they thought was going to do a good job, and they went to Cuba. And in the 3 years that they were in Cuba, which is when I was in the Navy, the congregation had dwindled down to nothing because of problems that preacher had brought into the church. And when they came back from Cuba, it was my mom and dad and about 3 or 4 families. The Wadles were one of the families. I can't recall some of the other names. But it was like starting all over with a big building and no people.